From the studios of Clean Fuels Alliance America, this is the Better, Cleaner, Now podcast. Fascinating ideas and conversations in the world of biodiesel, renewable diesel, and sustainable aviation fuel. Now, here's your host, Scott Tremaine.
And welcome. This week, MARC-IV's Alan Weber is joined by Michelle Starke, Director of Stewardship and Regulatory Affairs at CoverCress, as they discuss CoverCress as a low-carbon feedstock. On this episode of the Better, Cleaner, Now podcast.
Michelle, great to have you. Thanks for making time. I've been looking forward to this. Such a great topic. So you're working to commercialize CoverCress, a new oilseed technology which can be processed into low-carbon fuels. And it was developed from a weed, right?
It was.
A weed that we can find in fields. We can find it along the roadside. I mean, what kind of funny looks do you get whenever you start to tell your story?
Yeah, so first of all, we have to explain how CoverCress was originated and how it was domesticated. So the story is, yes, field pennycress is a common winter annual plant that you will find across the United States. The story about pennycress actually goes back a long time ago, though. So if you start looking back into literature, you can find papers about people trying it out as a crop since the 1940s.
Okay.
So it started around World War II. They were looking for some different alternative industrial oil type of crops. So looked at pennycress, just like they looked at some other places. At the time, it didn't seem to fit the bill very well, but on and off through that time, people have picked it back up because it does have it has oil qualities that would be good for industrial oil purposes.
And USDA had a role in this too, right? So the Department of Agriculture?
Yeah, so they started picking it up in the late 1990s because then there was this push for finding alternatives to renewable fuels. And so they started looking at it to make sure of its oil characteristics that it would fit into the renewable fuels profile and really started finding some success there. So they started a lot of research with it. In fact, some of the research was done out of the Peoria, Illinois office. And, some of those people had 15, 20 years of experience growing this plant for this different use from it.
Okay, so you got to help me out. Rumor is that one of your founders, as they were looking to develop this crop, would actually take vacations. And then as he was driving across the United States, he would stop and then get out, and when he found pennycress, and he would take those lines so he had genetic variation. Is that true?
Yeah. So they some of the founders would, just like you say, they would drive across the United States and they would take samples from different places. And of course, they would stop and ask the people, can I take a sample of this, right?
Can't imagine that their spouse was happy, though.
I don't know. I think it would make for some interesting family vacations, right? So yeah, they did these different samples, right? But at that point, it's just a different sample. So from then, we have real breeders who work with the plant, and they they apply their breeding knowledge to make sure that they do crosses with it and then do selections out of it, just like you would do normal selective breeding with any other crop.
Yeah, okay, so I've heard you refer to wild-type pennycress, and now I've heard you refer to domesticated pennycress. So what's the difference?
Yeah, so here's what I like to think about as background, right? So with any crop, people selected for different characteristics that they wanted, right? And think about your corn crop or your soybean crop, right? They selected for different yields, they selected for maturities, they selected for disease tolerance. So you can do that with any crop. And so for pennycress, they made selections off of it. They did breeding crosses first to try and see if they could do more agronomic consistency with it, maybe shorten the maturity of it, make it earlier maturity, definitely make more consistent yield off of it. They also applied some different breeding tools to it. So marker-assisted breeding is another area that we've used to help develop it. But finally, we've also done this thing called gene editing with it. Gene editing is tremendous. It's a tremendous tool to be able to make very specific changes in a plant. And so we've identified a couple of different areas where we made these very specific changes and made the composition now of the grain much more similar to what canola is.
Okay, well, that's interesting. And, we started off talking about the fact that this started as a wild type weed. So are there any things that you did to make it not a weed?
Yeah, so thanks for that question. So one of the traits that we have implemented, and this is through a gene editing process, it's actually a trait that is called a low fiber trait. So it does reduce the acid detergent fiber in the seed coat. And so that helps the grain for feed purposes or into animal feed, right?
I've heard detergent fiber a lot whenever I think about ruminants and what it can be fed to.
Yep. So lowering fiber helps the feed quality for it. Okay. Well, the genetic edit that actually happens, or what happens physiologically in that plant, is that you're reducing a certain chemical in it that goes into the seed coat. So the seed coat of the wild type pennycress is normally dark brown or black, right? And with the reduction of this particular chemical in the grain, it turns out to be a golden color.
Okay, so different color.
What that means, though, is that the seed coat is thinner than what it was, right? And so, look, then it's just a physical process because you made the seed coat thinner. It reduces the dormancy characteristics of it. It increases the germination properties of it.
So that's what we would, as farmers, be talking about hard seed, or seed that stays in the soil.
You got it.
And this won't, will it?
Right. So this, right, our researchers have been looking at this for a couple of years. And yeah, they see very few volunteers coming back after you plant this, different than how the wild type field pennycress was.
Okay, so the main thing that you did is change the seed coat, which ended up being lower in fiber, so it's better for animals in terms of the protein, germinates better, and doesn't leave hard seed in the ground. Did I get that right?
Correct. And then the other things that you would normally do with breeding, right? So we've selected for the winter annual plant type, right? Because in wild type field pennycress, there's a winter annual type, there's a spring annual variant, right?
But you're working on the winter.
We have selectively chosen the winter annual variant type of this. Turns out there's a gene that is determinate for that. It's something we just selected for. It's not a genetic edit that we did for it. Okay, so that's one other advancement we did. We also look at reduction in shattering, and so we can breed for better shattering tolerance or resistance to the plant varieties, and then just overall standability too.
So essentially, even though I've heard you refer to it as domesticated pennycress, this really isn't pennycress anymore. I mean, you have basically changed the entire plant in terms of how it performs in the field and what its traits are.
So we treated it much more like a crop, right? We haven't changed the genus and species, but you really haven't changed the genus and species of rapeseed to canola either, right? Yeah. So think about it in those terms. So the things that were done to select canola from rapeseed is really similar to what we did for selecting CoverCress from field pennycress.
Okay. So, Michelle, you know that I still farm. So in the state of Missouri, I'm about halfway between St. Louis and Kansas City. And in our area, and just really right just south of Interstate 70, and in our area, there's a lot of corn, soybean rotations. So if I was going to plant CoverCress, and if I was a farmer, where would it fit in my rotation?
Yeah, so in your area, you like to plant corn, and then maybe the corn starts to mature, say, in early fall. So then you would plant your CoverCress, say that mid to end of September type of time frame. It starts to produce the plant, in the fall. It establishes as a rosette. Then it stays in that stage through the winter period. It has to go through a cold period or something called vernalization before it will go into the reproductive period. So then in the spring, once it's gone through that, it starts to bolt, it starts to set flowers, it starts to set its pods, and then it matures by the end of May. For you, I think there's for your area, then soybeans can be planted at the end of May, and you still get the benefit of a full season crop of soybeans at that time.
And that's crucial. I mean, that's important, right? The fact that this crop would mature in May and be harvested in May. So essentially, you're getting 3 crops in 2 years?
In 2 years. And that's part of the benefit that you're able to talk with the farmers about. This is an additional income stream for them. And so, really just thinking about how to start integrating the climate smart ag practices that people are talking about, right? This acts like a functional cover crop because you're planting it over the winter. It helps to reduce erosion. It helps to suppress weeds. It helps to scavenge those nutrients from the former crop. And so, they get the win. The farmers get the win of the environmental stewardship that they're doing with their land. They get the benefit from the added income that they get from another crop. And I think we all get the environmental benefit of it producing a new feedstock that goes into renewable fuels.
Yeah. So Michelle, you referred to climate smart agriculture, and I guess, help me out in terms of whenever you say climate smart, are you talking about tillage? Are you talking about cover crops and how it functions the same as a cover crop?
Yeah, so I'm really talking about all of those things. So this works well in a no or low till situation in the field. This CoverCress does, but also the ability to plant a cover crop. So, being in Missouri, there's people who do use cover crops. But there's still a lot of land that doesn't get a cover crop on it. It doesn't get any type of rotational crop on it. And so it sits fallow during the winter, right? And you could think about it as, well, that's the same thing that we always have done. But at the same time, we can have an alternative to that with this type of a new situation. And the nice thing about this is, in order to do a cover crop, most of the time the farmer incurs some cost of doing a cover crop.
Yes.
Right? You have to plant it. You have to purchase the seed. You have to do something to help, produce that, right? With this, at least, the crop, there's no cost to the crop for the grower, and in fact, they can actually get revenue from it.
Yeah, so you've basically taken us from the planting of the crop all the way through to the harvest. Makes sense to me because we can consider getting 3 crops in 2 years. Whenever we harvest that crop, though, where does it go from there? How do we get from the fact that you talked about low carbon biofuels? We need to get it to market, or take me through that.
So our company will establish a contract with a grower to produce a grain for us. They sign a contract to do that. We provide them the seed to plant.
So what's the cost of the seed to the producer?
Yeah, there's no cost.
Okay, so
to this.
It's just an exchange. So you're going to retain ownership of the seed, and then the grower is going to be able to plant the crop. Okay.
It's very similar if somebody's done a seed production contract before. Okay. So we'll check once they plant the seed. We'll check in with them a couple of times during the year to make sure the crop is progressing well.
So you've got agronomists on your team.
We do.
Okay.
We do, and we also have field agents that we work with. And again, it's part of just our practice and experience with the grower to make sure that they're comfortable using this crop too, and they understand how it's being produced and how it's growing. But at the end of it, whenever you get ready for harvest, and since we are so small, we've arranged for the for grain pickup at the time of harvest. We'll just do that at the farmer level, right? So the farmer doesn't have to worry about taking the grain anywhere after that. We will contract to make sure that we can pick up the grain. From there, we've selected and built up a place that we can compile the grain. We'll clean it and dry it. From there, it goes to the processor. The processor then takes it, once it's processed or crushed for oil, then it goes to the refiner.
Okay, so and do you already have all those project partners picked out in terms of where it's going to be processed, into oil and meal and then processed into fuels?
We do. So this company was a startup, but in August of 22, our company was bought out all the way by Bayer, Bunge, and Chevron. And so we have arrangements for downstream processing with Bunge that's already in place. So the production will all go to them to fulfill that contract.
And then it'll be processed into a biofuel at?
Yeah, so their Destrehan plant is where they will do the processing, and then further down from that at the Geismar plant, that's where they will do the refining.
This is the Better, Cleaner, Now podcast. Fascinating ideas and conversations in the world of biodiesel, renewable diesel, and sustainable aviation fuel.
I'm Alan Weber, and we're speaking with Michelle Starke with CoverCress, Inc. Michelle, I introduced the podcast today saying that CoverCress was a feedstock for low-carbon biofuels. This aspect of a decreased carbon footprint is key, right, in today's marketplace, at least as I understand it. So why did you say that CoverCress is a low-carbon feedstock?
So interesting question, but I mentioned before that it's a winter annual crop. It actually doesn't use that many inputs to produce it.
Okay, so whenever you say inputs, what are we talking about? Fertilizer? Are we talking about chemicals or?
Right. So all of those types of things. Whenever I think about inputs to grow a crop, right, you consider how many tillage passes does it take? How much diesel does it take to drive that tractor across the field? What's your seed costs? What's your fertilizer costs? What's your crop chemistry costs, right? All of those things are what I consider inputs to grow a crop.
Okay.
So whenever I say it takes relatively few inputs to grow this crop, well, there's about 3 passes that goes over the field. 1 pass to do the planting, 1 pass to do a fertilizer application, 1 pass to do harvesting.
And relatively speaking, that's not that many passes in terms of costs, correct?
It's not if you think about all the different passes that you go across your field in a normal crop. But the other part is the fertilizer inputs to this. So the crop, if we're going to take it to grain, it will take about 50 pounds of nitrogen in the spring right before it goes into bolting, and then about 20 pounds or so of sulfur. That's relatively few. It's relatively little amount of fertilizer compared to other crops. Yep. And so that's why we have a low carbon score along with it.
I just thought of something. You mentioned the fact that you put additional fertilizer in the spring. What's the bloom color? I mean, I think of canola with a yellow bloom and massive fields of yellow across the landscape. So what's the color of the bloom of CoverCress?
Yeah, so the CoverCress flower is white.
White, okay.
Yeah.
So what we need to do is then have canola fields and CoverCress fields so we can have yellow and white all spread throughout the landscape.
You could do that. Yeah, you could do that.
So the other thing you mentioned you said low inputs, but you also said it's a winter annual oil seed. Does that play into any reason as to why it's a low carbon or a feedstock as well?
Well, again, during that time, you're using the ground that's already existing, right? We aren't taking any more farmland and putting it into production for this. You're using the same ground that you would use to grow your own corn and soybeans over. It's just that you're actually getting a use out of it instead of not planting anything on it during the winter.
It's interesting. I'm listening to you and I'm thinking to myself that CoverCress actually sounds relatively simple. A few passes, the inputs aren't necessarily that low. You've got your supply chain already worked out, someplace to go with the product to be processed. You have a partner to be able to turn it into a fuel, but nothing can be that easy necessarily. So there's got to be a few challenges that you have to work on a daily basis to be able to really expand and grow the use of CoverCress. Any insights as to what the challenges are?
Yeah, so I think first of all to think about, it is a new crop, and farmers maybe aren't so familiar with doing that. Now, while it doesn't take any different equipment to actually plant and harvest it, they do have to use their own equipment. They have to see the seed because it's a very tiny seed.
How tiny?
It's smaller than canola.
Smaller than canola.
Right?
Okay, so canola's small.
Right. so this is different, right? So it's a different size of seed that they have to work with. Their settings are not probably appropriate on their machinery right now.
But you said that it is the same equipment, though. So we're not talking about a grower having to go out and purchase new capital equipment.
No, but it does take the farmer some time to put the seed in his equipment and then see how it plants.
Okay.
Experience how that crop grows, right? Because there will be some settings that they have to adjust. We're working with different equipment manufacturers right now to refine, what exactly those settings are that they'll need to go through.
So you had said the fact that growers need experience, and so are you doing anything as a company to help give them some experience?
Yeah, so we have an on-farm adoption program where it's really a demonstration program. So we will provide the grower, again, they sign a contract with us, but it's really to then have the ability to plant the seed and then have the ability to see it on their farm. There's no cost to the farmer for the seed, but it's a relatively small amount. So it's something between like 20 to 40 acres of it, right? But it's enough that you get some experience in seeing how this works in your equipment.
Learn how to plant it, learn how to set the combine.
Exactly. Right.
So you had said demo fields, but are you already contracting for production?
We do have a small amount for production right now. Yeah, and that'll be smaller until we can get all of our logistics figured out and all of our other grain delivery processes in place most efficiently.
So I've been asking you lots of questions about the seed. That's a big interest of mine as a farmer. But the company itself. So CoverCress was a startup, correct?
It was.
And you've just been purchased recently. You mentioned that in terms of your 3 equity holders. So you've gone through a lot of growth. I guess, take me through how long did it take as a company to be able to work through all this and take pennycress as a wild type weed and then turn it into a product that's pretty close to commercialization here?
Yeah, so great question. So back in 2013, the company was started, but it was under a different name. So it started under Arvogenics, and then it progressed. In 2018, I believe, the name changed to CoverCress. I would be remiss, though, if I didn't mention a few things. So in 2019, this company entered into a public-private partnership with several Midwestern universities. That's called I-Prefer, or Integrated Pennycress Farm Enablement and Research and Energy Research. And there's been a number of papers and research coordination that's gone on with them. So they've been a tremendous help. That's particularly been driven out of Western Illinois University and Illinois State University.
Now, is that the partnership that was also funded by USDA?
That is. So USDA NIFA provided a $10 million grant to this I-Prefer group so that they could continue to commercialize pennycress. And so that's...
you're kind of a showboat then, because you can say that this is here we're a public-private partnership in terms of a startup that then commercialized to the point where major corporations then had interest to be able to see how it could be turned into a biofuel.
Yeah, it's a really interesting story. It's a really unique story, I think, to be successful at something like this.
So how big is the company now in terms of the number of employees? Because at one point in time, you probably had like 3 or 4 employees, and you're a lot bigger now, right?
We are bigger than that, but we're still pretty small. So the current number of employees is somewhere around 36. But, I've only been with the company for about a year and a half or so, and the company has grown by about 12 employees since then.
Yeah, so a year and a half. Mm-hmm. And before that, correct me if I'm wrong, but you had a long-standing career with some of the major corporations on the ag side of the world. So why did you make a leap of faith to go from a large multinational corporation, to a startup?
Here's the thing. You don't often have a chance to help commercialize a new crop. And so whenever I thought about, kind of the situation that we were in with thinking about how new crops are being developed in this renewable fuel space, and then understanding there was this type of an opportunity to drive this type of a new crop, it was pretty exciting. And so I could have stayed in my career with a different company, but I just think I could make a bigger difference by doing this.
Yeah, so for all the individuals out there that are maybe in college or graduate school, with what you do for CoverCress, give me an idea. What's a day or a week look like for you in terms of what you're doing now for a startup and bringing a new crop to the marketplace to turn into a low carbon fuel?
So really good question. So you said before what I do is regulatory affairs and stewardship for CoverCress. A lot of my previous career was also working in regulatory affairs, and it was particularly working with biotech crops and herbicide-tolerant crops. And that was going through, say, the U.S. regulations for deregulation. It was also going through getting approvals in our other trade countries like Korea, Japan, China that import our crops. So with CoverCress, since it's a new crop, right, a little bit of that just has to be understood and just managed through. But the same type of regulations that we have for biotech crops are pretty similar for what we have for a gene-edited crop too. So we still have to go through USDA regulations because it is a gene-edited crop. We will have to go through EPA, and this is a little different, but because it's a new crop, it's not on crop protection product labels as a rotational crop.
So what you're telling me is that you have a lot to do.
We do. We do have a lot to do, but we have a tremendous amount of support to do all of these things. So, while yes, there's a lot to do, there are a lot of people and a lot of even U.S. agencies who have been very, very supportive in sharing their time and knowledge to help us get to the point that we are right now.
I'm just making a guess, but as a small company, is it more challenging? I mean, do you, in terms of the resources that you have relative to maybe some other larger corporations that you've worked for?
Well, in the larger corporations, what you have are teams of people who can help manage.
Now you're a team of one.
Yeah, I have a team of two. So myself and there's another person who works in our regulatory department who has super experience working in kind of the USDA area and as a crop is going through their regulation. But the whole team is really committed to following all the regulations and following all the laws and rules that go along with bringing about a new crop like this.
Well, it obviously sounds like even if you're a small company, you've got some large aspirations out there. And I guess realistically, that's kind of the last thing I'd like to know is that, what are those goals for CoverCress as a company in terms of size or acreage? Because there's a large market out there large need for sure for low carbon biofuels.
Yeah, so this is the exciting part. If you think about the Midwest agriculture, and I kind of include those states of Illinois, Iowa, Missouri, those are our first three states. But if you think about the additional states, the surrounding states of Iowa, Ohio, Kansas, Tennessee, Nebraska, those type of states, there's a lot of acreage out there that doesn't get a rotational winter crop like winter wheat, and they're also not planted with cover crops. So of those states that I mentioned, there's over 75 million acres out there.
Yeah,
right?
A lot.
A lot of acres that don't get, again, either a cover crop or another winter rotational crop. And so our goal is to be on 3 million acres in 10 years. So if you think about the 75 million, compare that to 3, it's about 4%. We think that's a very doable goal.
That's great. And, Michelle, I really enjoyed this. And I thank you for your time to be with us today.
Hey, thanks so much. It was fun.
And thank you for listening. And be sure to like and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. And join us next week for another episode of the Better, Cleaner, Now podcast.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. To catch all the latest from Clean Fuels Alliance America, follow us at cleanfuels.org. The Better, Cleaner, Now podcast is a production of Clean Fuels Alliance America. That's all for us. Now it's your turn to be better, cleaner, now.